Good afternoon, everyone, and we welcome you all to today's webinar, from Cambridge University Press. We are absolutely delighted to have you all today, and we have with us, all the way from Cambridge exams, Neil Holloway, who's a publisher in the Cambridge English exams, and then we have Dan Akidil, who's the commissioning editor in Cambridge exams. And we have Kapil, who's leading with us in the Cambridge University Press, entire campaign across India. And I will ask Kapil to say a few words before we get started.
Well said, Sujata. The world is moving towards online teaching at all levels, and we at Cambridge want to ensure that we are always with you in this journey of preparing students to get the best possible scores when they take the IELTS test. In today's session, we have Neil Holloway and Dan Akidil, who are an integral part of the team at Cambridge University Press that produces IELTS learning materials. It's a pleasure to have them with us today, share their inputs on online teaching. With them, we have Sujata Paul, who is a senior language expert with over 20 years of experience as an English language and IELTS trainer. Sujata would be moderating today to make the session more fruitful for all of you. We have earmarked 15 minutes for all the questions that you might have at the end of the session. Please use Q&A section to put across all your queries. So without taking any more time, I would like to invite Sujata to please initiate the session. It's over to you, Sujata, once again.
Thanks. Thank you, Kapil. And today I'm excited and I'm delighted, in spite of being a part of the IELTS fraternity for years, there's always a room to learn more. So I'm all ears and eager to learn from Neil and Dan and explore together, strategies, tools, and make classrooms more connective even in this pandemic. We know students are learning from the comfort of their room. Quality and quantity both needs to be measured well to have the desired results. And we, as well-wishers of all our partners, and of course lead, when it comes to producing the IELTS material, would love to have this session as engaging and interactive. So it's time to hand over the platform to Neil and Dan. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sujata. Dan, can we go to the next slide, please? So today, my name is Neil Holloway, and today we're going to be looking at practical ways of teaching IELTS and teaching online. And we're going to look at different ways you can be using your course book that you have at the moment, or whatever resources and technology are available to you and that your students are perhaps already using in their everyday life. We're also going to be looking at how you can use other technology and platforms and technology that your students really enjoy using, and we want to try and make learning IELTS for them more interesting. So Dan, over to you.
Brilliant. So thank you very much, Neil, and hello, everyone. So let's start at the beginning. And one of the things that we need to consider in this new virtual environment is the type of class that we'll be teaching. Now, we can go for a number of different methodologies here, all the way to replicating our traditional classroom in a virtual environment. So having web cameras, audio, students and teachers together in one room. But we also need to consider that that might always be possible. There are sometimes connection issues. For example, participants or students may not be able to make certain lessons as standard in a traditional classroom. So one concept that I think works really nicely in a virtual classroom is a flipped classroom approach. And that means essentially setting the students language points, reading or listening texts, completing exercise before they enter the classroom. Then you can use the live online class as a chance for students to check their answers, to ask any questions about the exercises, to share ideas or to share doubts, or to focus perhaps on more productive skills like speaking, for example, things that they can't do outside of the classroom. Also, what it allows you to do, and I think this is a really, really good point, a really interesting way, is that by using a flipped classroom approach and kind of using the virtual lessons as a platform for checking answers, sharing ideas, it allows you as the teacher as well to start building your confidence in using the platform. You can start quite go quite limited, quite slowly. And then as you get more comfortable using virtual platforms, you can then start to add more features to it. And we'll look at some of those features later today in this presentation. So back over to Neil.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So we're aware at the same time that teaching IELTS is usually quite stressful for teachers because it's very different to teaching general English. The communicative approach, which most teachers enjoy teaching, is hard to do with IELTS. You really need to know what is expected of the exam, which is also can be quite difficult at times, and sometimes the information that teachers receive isn't the correct information, and there's a lot of myths that grow up amongst the students. And that actually that you're teaching skills rather than language a lot of the time with IELTS. So I think, you know, we do realise that teaching general English is seen as more fun, and that grammar and vocabulary is what teachers feel more experienced at and more confident with. But IELTS is slightly different, but at the same time, there are ways that we can make IELTS fun for the students, and also teaching IELTS online fun. So, for example, one thing you might want to do is use some social media that they're familiar with. Like here we have an example from Instagram. So you could use Instagram or another photo sharing app. Instagram's a good place to go. Students and teachers can share pictures here to talk about their hobbies, their hometown, places that they have visited. Like this is from my page, so that's the town where I live. This was a podcast that I was part of. And this is sort of like a little bit like IELTS Speaking Part 1. So Dan.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Essentially, the key here is personalization. It's allowing the students an opportunity to speak about something that they are familiar with, they know. And I think just also, as well as platforms like Instagram, it's taking advantage of things like search engines, for example, using the images tab, for example, in Google, and asking students. One thing that I like to do in my online lessons is to ask students to find 3 or 4 images that best represent that topic. So if you're talking about your hometown, for example, it could be 3 or 4 images of your hometown, of different parts of your hometown that you can talk about. If you're talking about a city that you might want to visit in the future, or a place you might want to go to, maybe, again, using Google to find those images and to bring them up. And I think what it does in the online lesson is it allows students to feel a bit more comfortable, because again, they're talking about a topic that they know, but also they've got the help of these visual aids as well. By using photos, seeing them in real time, you can almost get it's a really nice way of just keeping interaction, keeping engagement as well with your students. And you'll find that students tend to listen to each other a lot more when they're looking at photos, and they can ask questions, they can jump in, things like that. So it's a really nice interactive way of personalizing a lot of the material that you're talking about. Okay, and back to Neil.
Okay, so one of the things that we do have to be aware of, though, is that this is all very nice, and we are going to look at all of the skills today, but we have to bridge the gap between the communicative approach. It won't always work with IELTS, but at the same time, don't just think about doing practice tests all the time, because test awareness and communicative activities should always be linked to the exam, but it must remain engaging. There's nothing more boring than just sitting there doing practice tests or doing exercises. So with the online teaching, like the classroom teaching, we need to make it interesting for the students. But for a number of reasons, as we'll see today, IELTS is actually really suitable for online teaching. And today we're going to be looking at all of the different skills, and Dan's going to give you some great ideas that you can take away and look at in your own free time. But just to remind you of some of the things, we're going to look at the speaking test first of all. So we've already talked about the speaking test and how we can use photos sharing apps with this. That's 3 to 4 minutes, and it's questions that are generally about yourself, remember. Part 2, the 4 to 5 minutes, which is a monologue. And part 3, we're looking at those more abstract questions and more of a discussion with the examiner. And we're going to look at practical ways in a few minutes how you can look at all of these. So if we can move on now. So just some advice for speaking part 1. Remember, you need to answer 12 questions in 4 to 5 minutes. Some of the advice we could say is think about how you would answer the question in your own language to try and make it as natural as possible. I would say use 2 to 3 sentences. Don't give too much detail, but don't give too many short answers either. So just think, what's the natural way to answer these? And you always have to keep this idea of the exam in the back of your mind if you're studying for IELTS. And just to think, the examiner in part 2, the individual long term, the examiner gives you a test card. You'll talk about the topic for 1 to 2 minutes, and you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say and make some notes if you wish. So this is the format this takes. Okay.
Neil, before we go any further, let me ask a question to our lovely audience. So far we've looked at Instagram. We've had a quick recap, what speaking unfolds as on the day of the exam and how your prep should look at. So the first question to our participants or audience is, how many of you are already on Instagram? And how many of you have used it as a descriptive tool if you are, wanting the students to kind of have a trigger to start speaking? Good. I can see some responses coming already. So I need some more. I'm sure Instagram is more popular in India. Yeah. And do you think, now that you're saying you use it, do you think it helps students to break that ice and kind of have those descriptive adjectives, which are very essential in this particular question? Definitely. Okay. So there are some who have not used. So can I request, post today's session, try looking and exploring Instagram, which is full of opportunities, and seeing, how Neil and Dan have presented a very simple tool, which is already very popular with your students. And when you want to use a tool which they are very comfortable with, they would be more comfortable to kind of, connect. So this is one such output that you need to look into today. And those who are already using, start looking at the other ways which Neil and Dan are going to say how to prepare them well, knowing how much to speak, because that's always a question in the trainings that we do on behalf of Cambridge University Press. So you have the experts, please make sure ask in good questions to them. Over to you, Neil, you may continue.
Okay, thank you, Sujata. That's all very good information. I think actually we've already spoken a little bit about speaking part 2, so I'm going to pass you back over to Dan, actually, if you want to say some more about this.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. So here we have on the slide one question, a speaking part 2 question, and it's essentially describing a job that you would like to have. It's asking the candidates to say, you should say what the job is, what you know about that job, and what study or training you would need to do so you can get that job, as well as explaining why you would like to have that job as well. Now, one thing that works really well in virtual classrooms is using authentic material. And when you're in a virtual classroom, authentic material is just a mouse click away. And one thing particularly to focus on here with jobs, one idea is to use authentic job adverts. So this might start off, for example, with the students choosing a job. It might be a job that they would like to do in the future or a job that they've never considered doing. They then go online and they find an authentic job advert from a company in real time for that job. And then what that presents the students with is a whole list and paragraph after paragraph of authentic language that they can use and transfer into their responses. So of course, what the job is and what they'll be doing, that typically comes under the responsibilities. What they know about the job, again, the job advert will give them more details about that. And then essentially, they can pick out the key language and the language that relates to each point of the task card, and using language that they found and use that within their talk. And then that way, it's a really nice method because they know that they're using language that's used by professionals, by recruiters, and that you'll see in a job advert as well. So just one idea there of taking your speaking task and just seeing how you can apply it to the real world, just to give, again, more of that personalization, but of course bringing in more of that key language that's going to really help them when completing this task. So I'll hand back to Neil, talking about linking words. Neil, sorry, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. What I was saying was that as Dan's come up with some very interesting ideas here, but we always have to think about the exam, especially with IELTS students. So, you know, take these exercises, but remind them that in part 2, paraphrasing what is on the card is very important, and linking words are very important as well as these more general speaking skills that we're talking about. It's very important that in this part of the exam that students have a good understanding of linking words, and you should also remind them that, like the other parts of the exam, also in the reading and listening, it's very important. Knowing about paraphrases are also a very good idea. So Dan, some more practical ideas from you, but just remember that you always have to have the exam in the back of your mind for the students too.
So we move on to what is one of my most favorite activities to do in the in virtual classrooms. And this is utilizing something that you can find quite easily. In this example, I'm going to be using Google Docs, and I'll give you a live demonstration of how to use it in a minute. But just first to just give a bit of background about this kind of software. So essentially, this is using speech to text software. And what this allows you to do is it allows students to see their spoken English reproduced in text form in real time. And what you can then do with that is a whole host of things, but particularly it allows you and it allows your students to identify any language errors they're making, any errors with pronunciation, because of course speech to text software nowadays is incredibly sophisticated, it's incredibly accurate. So it's a really, as well as being a really nice tool, it's a very reliable tool as well. And so using that, seeing your students speak and watching as their language gets reproduced is certainly, in my experience for students, something that they really, really enjoy. And as a teacher, it provides instantly instantly a written format that you can then go in to use as error correction and to help students improve their spoken English, also their structure, their fluency, their accuracy, all those things. So I'm now going to give you a live demonstration of how this works. So if we go in, I will just now bring up a Google Doc. So this is using Google Docs, and this is a blank Google Doc that you will see when you open the document. If you come into tools just at the top, just here, and come down to voice typing, this will bring up a microphone. And essentially what you can then do is invite your students to talk. Now, there's a few ways of doing this. One way might be to ask your students to share their screen so that when they speak, they're speaking into their own microphone and the text will appear on their screen, but because they're sharing it, everyone in the class can see it as well. Another method that works quite nicely is that if you're teaching, what you can do is you can invite a student to talk. If you take out your headphones, if you're using headphones, just pull them out of your computer. That way when this, the student talks, it will come through your speakers into your microphone and will be reproduced on this document. So essentially, I'll give you a live demonstration of how this works. We click the microphone, and then all of a sudden, the text will appear on the Google Doc. And then you can use this in a variety of different ways for a variety of different speaking tasks. And then when the students have finished, you click the microphone again, and it gives you your text. And then you can go in and you can highlight any particular errors, perhaps pronunciation issues, anything like that. So it's a really nice tool, a really, really nice tool to use for, your students, and something that I really encourage using in your live virtual lessons as well. Okay, I'll stop there just in case there's any questions or any engagement from at all about that.
So I have seen some responses. You know, one of the trainers is saying we have been using it. What about the others? You know, do you think this will be effective in your classroom? You know, how many clicks did Dan actually do? How much time investment is this? And how practical it can have results for you? So, these tools are always there, but probably we never looked at to use them, fully. So of course, there are various ways which we would love to know from you too, which you're already using. So in your chat box, do keep writing to us. What are you using, to handle speaking effectively, to monitor progress of your students and to give them the correct feedback, because now you're not meeting them face to face. At least in most of the cities in India, the face-to-face channel is completely stopped for coaching. So please, we would love to hear from you also. And this is a session for you. We learn from each other. We would love to see comments coming from you too. And we've had some very good questions, Dan, up till now, but I don't want to kind of interrupt the flow. We'll keep the questions towards the end. No specific as such to ask further about the speech to text. So we are good to proceed further.
Right. Okay. With that in mind, I'll hand back to Neil.
Okay, so now just to remind you of part 3, and we are going to look at all the skills today. I saw some questions about the other skills, but we will come and cover those in a few minutes. Part 3, remember, it's 4 to 5 minutes. It's a conversation with the examiner, and it's connected to part 2, but it's more general or abstract. So if you were talking about a website or a film star that you like in part 2, then part 3 might be more general questions about technology or the concept of fame. Now, there is one way that we can answer these questions. You could have a look at giving an opinion, then a reason, and then an example. And this is a good way to answer all of these questions. But remember that it also has to sound natural if you want to get the higher band scores. So I'll just give you an example. So if we could have a look at the next slide, we've got some questions about technology and fame that are taken from part 3 of an IELTS exam. So if we just look at the first one, we could see something like, how would you compare famous people and celebrities today compared with the past? So the opinion could be, I think that famous people are less talented today than they were in the past. The reason is that a lot of people are famous for no other reason than just being on telly. One example I can think of is Love Island, which is people become famous just by meeting other people on an island, something like this. So that's one way to do it. Just think of the opinion, the reason, and the example each time for that. So we've got another activity now. So guess the question, the IELTS speaking activity, a very lovely activity that Dan's going to take you through now.
Thank you, Neil. So this is another activity that you can use really effectively in your virtual classrooms. It's also one that you can use in the traditional classroom as well. So we're looking here at the particular speaking activity. So what you do, if we go back to the previous slide where we have our list of questions, as teachers, what we can do is we can give one question to one student and making sure that each student receives a different question. Then what you ask your students to do is to record their answers, but they don't read the question out. They just record their answers to this question. They can record it either on their computer, on their phone, for instance, and then saving that as an MP3 or saving it once they've recorded it, they can then send that on to you. Now, this can be done either in the live lesson itself. You might want to give them time, so 5, maybe 10 minutes for them to record their answers and then send on, or remembering that flipped classroom approach, you can ask them to do this before the lesson begins. So in the live lesson, what you'll do is you'll play each recording and the other students need to work out what the question is that they are answering. And so, for example, you can use the chat box here. The students can write the question that they think the student is answering, and then you can have a list of those within the chat box itself. Or if you, and there's a few different ways you can grade this to make it even harder. Or, for example, you can not give them any list of questions. So you might start, for example, by telling the students, okay, the student is answering one of these 3 questions. Which one do you think it is? That makes it slightly easier. Or if you want to make it harder, just open question. What question is the student answering in this recording? And then this allows, first of all, it allows the student to provide an answer and to see how coherent, fluent, and accurate they have been. Have they answered the question? And the answer to that is, have the other students guessed what the question is? And then from that, again, that presents a really nice opportunity for language correction, again, focusing on grammar, perhaps vocab as well, accuracy, fluency, coherency, etc. All really, really important skills that connect to the IELTS speaking activity and to speaking in general. So a really nice activity there, I think, certainly for students to do to improve their speaking. Okay, with that in mind, we're now going to move on to the IELTS writing paper. But before we do, just to bring in if there are any questions or anything points to raise here as well.
There are 2-3 questions in case you want to take up for the speaking right now. So one very important and which is always a burning question is like when to stop, you know, how much to speak and when to stop. You know, this comes in every training and we would love to have an answer from you as well.
I think that, as we were saying before, with part 1, for example, each question should be probably about 2 or 3 sentences, because that's how would you naturally do it in your first language. Just think of it like that. Obviously, the second part, a lot of people think if the examiner stops you, then that's a bad thing, but it's not. Just try and say as much as you can in those 2 minutes and try and go for the whole 2 minutes. Usually if you've been interrupted, it shows that you've done well in this part of the exam. In part 3, as I said, that idea of the opinion and the reason and an example, if you answer them like that, but in a natural way, but just think, I'm giving an opinion, a reason, and an example, that's a good way to approach all of the questions in part 3. One thing I would say for Indian students is that they like to speak very fast, and it's perhaps better to slow down a little bit. For a lot of other speakers, we say they need to speed up. With Indian students, they tend to speak really, really fast, and sometimes the coherence and cohesion is impacted by them going too fast rather than taking a breath and just being a bit more calm and speaking more at the speed that me and Dan are today, rather than trying to say everything really quickly. Is another piece of advice I'd give specifically to Indian students as well.
And I think just that's really interesting, Neil. And I think particularly if we bring in again the kind of some of the ideas we've seen as well for those speaking activities, particularly for the part 2, I think it could be quite difficult to understand how long 2 minutes is. So I think by recording, for the speaking part 2 particularly, I think by recording yourself and sending those questions in and sending them to the teacher, you start to get an idea, because of course you'll see it on the phone or computer. It will tell you how long the answer is. So you can start to, and your students can start to get an idea of how long these answers are and how long they're spending on their answers. So I think it's really interesting when you start to record your own answers, you get a better idea of how, the time it takes you to answer those questions.
The good thing is, you know, when the API speech detector was up on our slides, a lot of trainers were writing that they're using other tools, similar tools to help students record, because they realize that's very important to hear, you know, what you're speaking, because reflection is an important stage. And of course, for marking too, trainers need some recordings. So Dan, I think it'll be useful in case you can kind of once again echo the benefits of API and link it to the speed of the answer, because I think that beautifully kind of gives an answer to, you know, how, at what pace to speak, and not think fluency is about the rate of speech only. So I think that will be nice, because a lot of things they are using, but they need to understand why API has an edge over the others? I would want you to kind of just echo something there, please.
Yeah, sorry. So on the speech to text software, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think yeah. Speech to text software, essentially what it allows you to do in terms of pace and reproducing what it is that you've said. I think in terms of using things like the microphone option, of course, to start it and to record it, you are able to kind of see it does show you how quickly you're producing your language, of course, and it shows you naturally how at the speed in which you're the pace in which you're going. So I think actually on a lot of software as well, the one thing I'd like to say, Google Docs I've used because it's quite easily accessible and it's quite, as you've seen, it's quite easy to bring up. But I think it's exploring the technology that's open. If you do want to work on pace particularly, it's looking at different features of these speech to text softwares to see if you can, for example, slow it down maybe, or speed it up, or record how quickly those are going. And this is, I suppose this is the kind of the broader picture of using technology in our lessons, is starting small, seeing what it can do, and then just building up slowly as you go and exploring more of the features that are available. But certainly, yeah, I think it's a wonderful option.
Perfect. And I think there's some questions which are coming to us for marking. I think this session is more about the strategies and how to kind of teach effectively and make it more interesting. Do you want me to give them the IELTS.org website link to understand marking better, or would you like to field any of the questions?
I think it would be better just for today, because it's not really the focus of today, if you could guide them towards the website. But also, I'm happy to put my email up at the end of the discussion as well to take this offline, because I know there's always a lot of questions about marking, but I don't want to get sidetracked and then to miss out on the ideas that Dan's put together for us today. So I'm happy to answer them outside of today if anyone's got any.
Thank you. That's kind of more the welcome for each of us. But I'll give you the website link, and it's very powerful. It's just that you need to be patient to read it. Answer is in the black and white, but we think there's beyond. There's nothing beyond. You need to be an examiner to be able to understand the real marking. On the face value as trainers, what you need as an understanding is given in the black and white, and it is very clearly listed. Yeah. So please try connecting with the black and white, and you have the answers there. And Neil, in addition, has volunteered to field few. So me and Samarth would kind of collate what can go across, and we'll write to you, Neil, for that.
Oh, okay. And also, one thing I'd also say is that recently we've brought out a PDF, well, a lot of PDFs that can be downloaded. They're called the Mindset Teacher's Guide, and we look at all the marketing in this, and it's free. It's free. So if anybody wants to download that, they just have to register for Cambridge eSource and then put it in the code. But I can give the details. Samarth will have the details for that. And it goes with one of our course books, but this is an extra thing that we've just done to help teachers understand IELTS a little bit better. And that's free for anybody if they're using the book or not. So that's
I've had a look at that PDF because Neil marked it specially to me, some time back, and I really enjoyed going through each, and we will definitely give you the link. We also have some slides dedicated on mindset, which will be just coming up shortly. And so over to Dan and Neil, let's kind of proceed further.
Okay, so yeah, so over to the writing, and just a very quick reminder. So it's 2 compulsory writing tasks. You have 1 hour to write. Task 2 scores twice as many marks as task 1. So you should spend 20 minutes on task 1 and 40 minutes on task 2. And students receive an overall band score from 1 to 9. In the reading, the average mark in interview is 5.8 at the moment. And obviously we want students to get up to 6.5, 7, even 7.5. So one of the key things is to know a little bit more about the marking and about the format of the test. If we carry on to the next part. So in writing part 1, we'll just quickly look at writing part 1. The most common source of questions tend to be graphic information. So for example, a pie chart, a line graph, a bar chart, or a table. We also sometimes have the process diagram and the maps, the changes in a map, but that's becoming less common because none have been written for a few years, but there are still some in the bank. And one thing that I would say is very important is knowing what the examiner is looking for. So if we can carry on. So in the task achievement, they're looking at an overview and key features and what data you use. The vocabulary range, the word choice, the word formation for the lexis, coherence and cohesion, so using these cohesive devices and referencing well, and the grammar, the range of structures and how complex it is and how accurate your writing is. But one thing that I would say is very important is knowing about some of the penalties for this marking as well as what they're looking at. So the overview is one of the things that we should look at. The overview gives a general picture of the most important information that can be identified. It can occur anywhere in the response, but is often written at the end, and it should not be confused with an introduction. So you always need this overview in part one, because there are penalties that students sometimes don't get the mark they deserve, and we really want them to get the mark they deserve because of this. The length of it, basically in the task achievement, they're losing a band 1 for every 10 words less that they've written, or copying from the task rubric. So again, this paraphrasing what's in the task rubric is very important. If you're copying from that, then again, the words, the number of words is actually taken off, so you can lose a band in the task achievement. If you don't have an overview, this thing that tells us what the whole graph is looking at, you can't score above band 5 in task achievement. If you don't have the data from the graph, again, band 5 is the maximum. If you don't have the key features, the most important things, a band 4 is the most you can get. Inappropriate format. So, you know, if you do bullet points instead of paragraphs, in part 1, you don't necessarily need a lot of paragraphs, but if you have the wrong format, again, band 4. And misunderstanding the input, so is a band 3. So if you make sure the students read the question carefully, I think this is such a big, you lose so many marks for this one, because sometimes some students try to memorize tasks, so they're not really answering the question. And because of this, there's a big forfeit of your points if you don't answer that question. But quite often students don't do it because they misread or misunderstand some of the data. But sometimes these graphs are really, really boring. You know, they talk about meat export from South American countries or things like this, things that aren't very interesting for your students. So one of the things you could do is find graphs for them to practice from the internet, or get them to make surveys in class. I mean, this is one graph that you might want to use them to make comparisons with. This one shows how many runs in one-day internationals Sachin Tendulkar got in every year of his career. So that might be more interesting than talking about South American beef production, for example. So you could get them to highlight what the main trends here, because knowing what the main trends are is very important. Is there anything you'd like to say about writing?
Yeah, I think you've really captured there, Neil. Again, one of the really nice features of working online is that you can quite quickly go and find graphs and diagrams that are perhaps more interesting to students. Again, thinking about personalizing them, because when of course the subject matter is more interesting, typically your students are more engaged, and then that's when you can start working on the skills development. So I think just simply to add here, Neil's already touched upon this, but just to say, thinking about using graph making tools, one extension activity you might like to ask, it might be coming out of a reading text, for example, that talks about data or statistics or information like this. Perhaps students can pull out relevant data, feed it into an online survey maker, online graph maker, and then it reproduces the graph in real time. Or to make it a bit easier, as Neil suggested, finding graphs online that are already there, perhaps where the subject matter is slightly more interesting to your students, and working on the skills development that way. So I think it's a really nice, as Neil said, a really nice way of making it relevant for your students.
Absolutely, Dan and Neil. Before we proceed further, I need to kind of get some input from our participants. So, you know, as you are listening to Neil and Dan, Neil covered about the band descriptor window. You know, we know how detailed is the band descriptor and how confusing can it be for students if you just kind of give that tabular sheet and say, look, here you are and here you want to be. It may look Greek or maybe overwhelming for them. So what Neil did for us was kind of, you know, very simply gave us an opportunity when we are marking, you know, on, you know, scripts or giving feedback, why not use language from the band descriptor so that they know exactly when they're not doing this, what are they losing on, you know, and that's where it becomes a part of them, right? So, you know, Neil, if you allow, I think that slide can be shown once more, because I think a lot of people, you know, don't know to what extent band descriptors can be shown to the students. And the idea is to improve them and not confuse them. And it's confusing for trainers too, many a times. So please write in the chat box how many of you are using band descriptor language already while giving feedback. How many of you are using band descriptor specific language to give feedback where necessary? And do you think that language helps for students to relate better and be able to kind of, you know, close the gap? Do you think that helps? Yeah, thank you so much. And we've got overwhelming yes, Dan. Overwhelming yes. It's still coming. It's not stopping. It's not completely. Yeah. So the next thing that we saw on the next slide, Neil, I'm sorry, I'm asking to shuffle again. The colors and the graphs. How many of you experiments with graph? How many? Or do you think it's too time consuming as trainers and you need a ready-made attractive graphs, not the black and white, which are books prints? Yeah, sorry, but that's what the material which is being printed as a hard copy looks like. Yeah, so please wait. We're going to show you what our lovely online tool as colors from Mindset brings for you, all colors. Yeah, Dan, correct? A lot of colors in the Mindset.
Oh, it's, yeah, absolutely.
Very
Yeah,
attractive. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
we
presented.
I know we don't want to talk about mindset too much today, but one thing to say, we did try to make it so that it's more interesting for the students rather than just these boring things that are on the exam, you know, like the life cycle of a salmon. We tried to make it something more interesting than this. But just going back to the band descriptors as well, the book that we said to download, we've tried to change that so that teachers can see, like, this is exactly what a band 5 looks like, this is exactly what a band 6 looks like. But going back to what we said before, that knowing where you can lose marks and really sort of, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but sort of have a really bad impact on your future just by not paying attention to that. It's really important that we get the students to know this very clearly, that they don't do this or you'll get a band 4, you know. It's very important. For example, you know, just this one sentence, an overview saying what the whole graph is about. If you don't do it, you can't get above band 5 in task achievement. And that can be, you know, the difference between you getting the university place you want and not getting the university place you want. So it's really important, I think, that students are aware of exactly what the exam's asking.
perfect. We are good to move. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I've spent a lot of time on that, so I'll try and go a little bit bit quicker through part 2. So writing part 2 is an essay, and this is, again, 250 words you have to write, as we said. There are different types of essay. Basically, we've got the sort of question where, do you agree or disagree? What are the advantages and disadvantages of something? And discuss the 2 different views of something and give your opinion. One thing that's really important is you have to say why you agree or disagree and give your own opinion. Remember this, give your own opinion. Remember that you must show your opinion, but must also develop both sides of the argument. And this can be quite hard, especially for younger students, because they might not have an opinion on this. So again, getting them to go online and learn about different things is also very important. Before they start, it's very important that they note down any ideas that they have on the topic so that they don't go off topic. I mean, it's very easy to do that when you're writing in an exam, and also to be very aware of what the general organisation of one of these essays is. So, for example, in the first paragraph, we have the introduction. Then the meat, as I like to call it, the main important part of the discussion should be in the next parts of this sandwich, if you like. So typically in an IELTS essay, you'll have one side of the argument and the other side of the argument for the next two paragraphs. And then the final paragraph, the conclusion. What do you think? What do you believe is your opinion with this? So just think of it as a sandwich with two pieces of meat rather than three pieces of meat that I've got here, usually in the middle. You might want three too, though. And is there anything you've got to say about writing here, Dan? Are there any activities you'd like to talk about?
Nothing to come into at this point, so I think we can move on to the reading.
Reading, okay. Let's move on to reading.
Me
Sorry.
and Dan, I think we can cover a bit on cohesion and coherence because that's come as a question time and again.
Okay.
I know you mentioned about linkers, but that was in the speaking part. I think the link from there here can also be kind of brought together because there are questions in the chat box for the same.
Yeah. Do we want to look at the questions or just talk a little bit more about coherence and cohesion?
Cohesion, how to take care of the coherence and the cohesion. I think that will cover most of the questions.
I think first of all is think how the whole essay is going to fit together. So the overall coherence. If there isn't overall coherence, you can't get above a band 5. So that's thinking that we've got to have an introduction about what you're going to talk about this topic. And then you need like probably 2 paragraphs, one looking at one side of the argument and one looking at the other side of the argument. And then the third paragraph looking at the conclusions that you can draw about it. Now, there also has to be linking together between the sentences so that it makes sense. So that's what I was talking about with the before the picture that we have with this guy in the bar where it says like, I don't always change the subject, but when I do, how's the weather? Because students are aware that they shouldn't do this, but when you're writing very quickly, changing that subject in between sentences and even within a sentence can be an issue. So thinking what is the overall meaning of this sentence? And then as we talked about before, the linkers in the speaking, linking those sentences together in different ways, not just using and not just using but using words like however, furthermore, nevertheless, can be the difference between a band 5 and a band 6. I'm not going to go into all the details about the bands, and if there are any other questions about coherence and cohesion, maybe we can take them later in the discussion today, because we've still got 2 skills and about 10 minutes to get through them. So. Is that okay, Sujata?
Yeah, definitely. But
Okay.
we need more inputs because the questions are still there for coherence and cohesion. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We'll take them later because reading, funnily enough, for Indian students at the moment, their average score is 5.7. So it's one of the ones that they're doing not so well in at the moment. So we're going to have a look at reading. And the idea of introducing students to different texts through the course book, throughout the course book, for example, in our case, or online, getting them to explore these ideas and, you know, getting closer to the exam, looking at what those topics are that come up time and time in an exam, because we have to bridge that gap later between academic study and IELTS. So, you know, some of these texts in the reading, they're not about very general subjects, but that's intentional because the students is to give everybody a fair chance of knowing it. So it's about a topic you don't normally know about. So we have to look at the reading skills in general. And I know Dan's got some good activities to help you with the reading.
Thanks, Neil. So yeah, this is an activity based on a reading text that I've used in online classes and works really well. Typically, what it does is it allows students to try and get an understanding of the overall themes of the text, but also to drill down and look at how a text is put together as well and how it's structured. So in this slide, you can see an example from a reading text called A New Learning Age. And I think obviously what when you study reading skills and you work on reading text with your students, typically in course books you will see a list of questions that go with it, of course, and I suppose the primary purpose, particularly for exam students, is to get those questions correct. But I think what we can also do, particularly in an online class, is we can really start to pick the text apart and really use the text again as platforms for other activities and other ideas. So I'm going to present a few ideas to you now. Of course, when you've got a text, typically it's about a general theme. So in this case, it's about healthcare, but particularly it's about kind of cutting edge technology in the healthcare industry. This text talks about using VR technology, so virtual reality technology, to train surgeons. So a really interesting text with some really interesting ideas. And essentially one way to start this is by just highlighting the kind of medical words, if you want to pick out the health words related to healthcare, asking students, giving them 5 minutes to read through the text and just to underline the words that they can find that are related to healthcare. Again, allowing for an extension of vocabulary around that particular topic. Another one that I really like doing is, you can see an example here with the orange boxes. I do this with students because I think what it does is it allows them to think about, again, how the sentence has been put together, but also the overall meaning of the sentence as well. So in the text, simply what you do, and you can do this, I've used a PDF here, but you can do this quite simply in a Word document. If you put your text into a Word doc, and if you share your screen, you can then either delete words, put an underscore in there just to show that there's a gap. You can use the shapes tool in Word just to cover the word, as I've done in this example on the slide. And then it's asking your students to try and figure out what word is there, or what word has been blanked out. You could turn it into a bit of a game, so awarding points, for example, 3 points to the students who can get the word exactly, 1 point to a student who maybe has got the right idea and a word that works but isn't the exact word as well. So you can kind of bring in this element of gamification of scoring just to add a bit more interest to the activity. I'll leave these two here. I'm going to put Neil on the spot and I'm going to ask him if he can work out what 2 words are missing. By all means, write them in the chat box as well, and I'll reveal it at the end. Sorry, Neil, this is, we didn't plan this, so.
No, you didn't, and I really haven't got an idea. I was getting ready for my slides as well then.
So we're looking for 1 word that goes into that gap there.
In both the gaps, the same one.
Sorry, 2 different words.
Yep.
And I'll allow participants as well, whilst you're watching and whilst Neil's doing it.
So we have Sarabjit already giving an answer.
Oh, great.
Okay, yeah, good.
And Navdeep. So I'm not going to say the answer unless we don't see at least 8-10 answers.
Okay, that's a nice idea.
Okay. So some of the answers look like give an objective, aid, idea, provide, aim, and assist, intention. These are the choices which are coming. Enhance, aim.
Lovely. So in this first paragraph here, yeah.
Okay, and then it's objective, idea, provide, motive. I think they're on the same line, but
they're doing really well. They're doing really well, although not the answers though. I'll give the answers. However, sorry, I'll put it's quite easy to put you all on the spot like this. But you can see, hopefully, what that shows you. The reason I did that, hopefully, what that shows you is you can see the engagement instantly. You know, particularly in online classes with reading texts, I think getting students engaged, keeping them engaged. This is one really nice idea. So I'll give you the answers. The first one is transform training for medical staff, and the second gap is responsibility, whose main responsibility is to promote the new technology. So again, you can see how that works. And then what we can then do, when you've got subject matter like this, and of course we've spoken about this throughout the presentation, making the subject matter interesting and engaging. Now, of course, virtual reality is something that is really progressing nowadays. So why not ask your students, as an extension of this, to then go and find other industries that are using virtual reality, moving away from healthcare and perhaps going into the automotive industry, for example, the airline industry. How are they using virtual reality? And again, using the reading text, therefore, as a springboard for extending ideas and then bringing that back as a communicative discussion, a speaking task in the lesson. It works really, really nicely, because what you've done essentially is you've used the reading text that's there to you, but you've just expanded on it. And again, in a virtual classroom, you can do that relatively quickly by asking students to go away and research other ideas. Again, thinking about the flipped classroom approach, they can do that outside of the classroom, and you bring them back in the next lesson to do the communicative aspect of it. So essentially finding real world examples, and not just reading text, of course, perhaps extension videos as well around the same topic, researching videos, a video that they've seen that talks about this topic, again, bringing that back into the class and talking about it. Just things that you can do not only to improve reading skills, but also to act as springboards for discussion as well. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas, and we'll hand back to Neil then to talk about reading format and content.
So we had we had an overwhelming engagement, with just these 2 blanks, Dan. Imagine, more we do it, more active, students we have, and that's what we wish. Irrespective, we are not face to face, but we are breaking all barriers. And it's not only the uninterrupted internet supply that can do it for us. It's us as a human to look at various methods and tools already existent. And even by doing these small activities, we can bring around a major difference. So first one is attention, then engagement, and then of course, measuring how much are they understanding. And one important tool here, which Dan kind of looked at, was also the grammar that we need to see in these blanks. So as training experts, you really need to see, when you were giving the answers, which part of speech were you aiming for, which will come with 2, because the grammar army man, which looks very small, but is very powerful, is sitting there. And of course, then again, we had another opportunity here before we looked at what we are answering in the chat box. So, it's not so easy to get to the part of speech, but more you practice, the better you become. But you should start.
That's a really good point. And then thinking about how you can expand on that as well. So not just one word, it might be 2 words, 3 words, and then really you can start to push, this idea of starting small and really building on those blocks, and to the point where you can gap whole sentences, and students need to try and work out what the idea of the sentence might be. Again, these kinds of skills development work really nicely. So yeah. Really good point.
Perfect. I think Neil is good to start with the next slide. Neil.
Okay, so I was just looking whether we should cut any slides out, but anyway, I'll try and go as quickly as I can so you can get some more of Dan's great ideas. So just to remember about the reading format and content, there are 3 different texts with 40 questions. It takes 1 hour to complete. And what people sometimes forget is that the texts increase in difficulty. So although the general advice is to spend 20 minutes on each part, you might want to tell weaker students to spend a little bit more time on the earlier passages, because that's where they're going to score more marks. And with students who are better, that they might want to spend more time on part 3, because that's where they're going to be challenged more, and they should be able to answer the ones in part 1 quite easily. There are several different task types as well, which I don't think we'll go through now. All of those, but there are some important tips for reading. So we should know when to skim and when to scan. Back a bit, sorry.
Sorry, Neil.
When to skim and when to scan. We'll have a look at that in a minute. Synonym and paraphrase, and awareness of this is very, very important. We also have to look at what the question is actually asking, so read the questions carefully. And distractors, these are the things that teachers and students hate. The distractors are things that try and make you answer the question wrongly, and they're especially in that yes, no, not given sort of question. So it's like, does it say this exactly, or does it say something similar? So in multiple choice, and the yes, no, not given, or true, false, not given, they happen all the time. And the same is true for the listening for the multiple choice. So we should have a look at skimming and scanning, sorry. So skimming is reading the passage quickly and concentrating on content words. So that would be for the sort of task we just talked about and looking for the distractors. And scanning is for looking for specific information. So looking at the different types of tasks, we have to think about these specifically. So that's just a quick visual of scanning sort of in the brain, like a brain scan, and skimming just on the surface, going over the surface like a surfer. So here's just some questions for you if you'd like to jump in. So looking for the, actually let's test Dan as he did the same to me. So the first one, looking for the overall meaning of text, would that be skimming or scanning, Dan?
Oh, now you're really putting me on the spot. That's going to be skimming, I'd say.
Yeah, okay. To complete a multiple choice question.
Scanning.
Okay. To answer a short answer question.
Oh, to answer a short answer question, I'm going to go for skimming. I might be wrong though.
Scanning, actually.
Scanning,
yeah, looking for that short answer, you know, the 2 or 3 words one.
Yeah,
and matching headings.
Oh, should we go for skimming?
Yeah, well done. Okay. So now back to you for some activities connected with this.
Brilliant. So yeah, as that demonstrated, of course, you know, finding that difference between skimming and scanning. And I suppose the next activity that I'm going to show you essentially is thinking about our students' reading skills in terms of how quickly they can read. And I think what this activity does quite nicely is it starts to develop students' ability to perhaps improve, particularly if your students are feeling not too confident how quickly they can read, or if they're missing words, for example, as they read too quickly. Again, starting small and slowly developing the speed in which they read. And I'm going to give you a live demonstration of this actually, because it's a really nice tool that, again, I've used with students, and it works really nicely for developing reading skills, particularly, again, looking at the speed in which they read. So this is an example called Spreeder. You can see the web address up there. This is just one tool. There are many tools that do this, but this is just one that we've seen. One that's available. So I've pre-prepared a short text that I've just copied in. This was taken from a news article yesterday about the potential of life around the clouds of planet Venus. And essentially what you would do is you would paste the text that you're asking your students to read into this. And it's going to look quite different, because what it will do, once you click Spreed, essentially it will present each word one at a time. So if you click the play button down here, it will produce that text, but what it will do is it will just give it one word, and you'll find as you're reading it, it's a nice way of practicing reading skills. And what's nice about this tool particularly is that you can then change the settings of it. So if you do want it to go a bit quicker, you simply increase the words per minute, and then save that, come back to the restart, hit play, and it will go a bit faster. So again, it's just about starting off slow, perhaps starting off at a slow pace, and then just getting your students to increase the pace of the same text, just to see how quickly they can read and keep up with it. What you might like to do in the classroom, for instance, is just take one, maybe 2 or 3 sentences or one paragraph that one question is being asked on, and then give them the reading text in this format, and then give them the question, just to see if they've managed to read it and understood it, and then asking the question. So again, it's just another nice way of developing reading skills, and particularly the speed of which your students are reading. All right, so we'll go back to the presentation, and we'll continue with Neil to go on to,
Dan,
yes, go, yes. Yeah.
Dan, before we move ahead, I think what Dan just covered is very critical, you know, to having time management in the reading exam. A lot of students feel that the exam is lengthy, and they're not able to kind of do the exam the same way they do it at, you know, in the center or at home. You know, the home practice results are better than the actual test day, and they feel it's only the stress. Probably it's not only the stress, it's also to do with the skimming, scanning techniques. How comfortable are you with those techniques? And do you understand that some questions may not even need that scanning time versus the skimming time? So matching headings is one such category, which rarely becomes mind-boggling for many. And all the heading options looks like a correct option moment you see the similar vocabulary term, but that's not the case. We're not going to go in depth because we have time constraints, but please understand what Dan took us through to see what and how you read also makes a difference. And most of the Indian students, not to generalize, many have this idea of not reading at all and just kind of using only scanning by keywords. And at times, after finding 28 to 30 answers, there's a point where they don't make progress. And that's because everything is not scanning. So in case you want to improve your scores, please use the inputs of today's session. Go back, practice, use as trainers, find value addition as users yourself before you take them to your classrooms with conviction and definite results. Dan, anything that you like to add more? I hope.
I think that's a really nice summary, and particularly of how to use this kind of software as well to develop those skills. So thank you.
Thank you. So we're good to move, because I can see Neil saying let's move.
I'm just wondering how much I should go into this, because I know Dan's still got some listening things to tell the participants about, but we'll just quickly, just a quick reminder that these distractors are very important. There's something that you makes you think that it is the correct answer. So just going back to what Sujata said a second ago, that reading, sometimes you have to read in detail because it's not the first answer you see. That's not exactly what they're telling. And especially when you're looking at the multiple choice questions and these true, false, doesn't say sections of the exam, that's what they're really testing. Can you see the difference, the real difference between the right answer and the wrong answer? And these are also something that comes up in the listening. So if we move on to the listening now, and I will do this very quickly, there's 4 parts of the listening. There's a variety of types of questions that are used, similar to the ones that you see in the reading, not the true, false, not given, but the others are pretty much the same. The best idea is write your answers on the question paper as you listen, because you have 10 minutes to transfer at the end. Each question is worth 1 mark, but you have to be very careful because you lose marks for poor spelling and poor grammar. Also, you only hear this once. The accents that you hear are British, Australian, New Zealand, American or Canadian, so the countries where English is the first language, officially the first language anyway. And the first recording is a conversation between people set in an everyday context. Then we have a monologue in a social context, so an announcement at a train station or something like this. A conversation is between up to 4 people, usually in an educational place, so it could be students discussing a project or a lecturer discussing something with students. And part 4 is a monologue, which is which is always on an academic subject. So it's like a presentation at a university or a lecture at a university. We do have some tips here for listening. I mean, the first one would be predict what you think the questions are going to be. And as it says here, make sure you check for spelling. A good idea is to write any numbers in the digit form so you don't lose marks for spelling 1 or 2 incorrectly. And to check that you've written the right number of words. So no more than 2 words and or a number means 2 words and a number, but so up to 3 there, but only 2 if it's just a word. Also, we have some examples of distractors. So for example, if we, sorry, I lost that slide actually. If we read the extract below from Melissa's message, we have to underline any words and phrases which may distract you from choosing the correct answer. So I don't want to go through this now, but it's sort of like they might mention where shall we meet? So they might say outside the cinema. But, oh, I can't make it then. I'll meet you at the garage next door because I have to take my car in to be serviced. So the correct answer is garage, not cinema, something like this. And I think just because we're running out of time, I'd like to really get Dan, pass over to Dan to talk about some listening activities.
Yeah, just thank you, Neil. Just to finish off then with essentially with listening, I think a lot of the certainly when I was first starting out, a lot of the issues I had was particularly actually about organization. So I suppose this isn't an activity as such, it's more about how to keep up the kind of the rhythm of your lesson and to ensure that when you have a listening file, for example, that you can access it quickly. And one thing that I found that I really find quite useful, again, if you're using a Word document or if you're using an ebook, for example, with the PDF, again, it's exploring the software that's available to you. And one thing that works really nicely is this paperclip tool. And this is actually quite nice, particularly if you're teaching the same material again and again, because you can save it and it will always be there. So essentially what that paperclip does, what you can do in Word and in PDF is you can attach files into the document itself. So for example, where you might have, and this is particularly good if you're using a flat ebook or a PDF that doesn't have, the hotspots or the audio icons already inside, so you manually put them in. So essentially, in most documents, you'll see an insert button, and it's just insert audio. It will bring up a paperclip or an icon. And it just means that what you can do is you can position that paperclip there with the audio file. So all you need to do is just double click that paperclip and then the audio will start playing. It's just a way of just ensuring that when you come to the listening and you're ready to go, that the audio file is there waiting for you. So just a nice, just a tip I found, something I found that's really useful from a teaching point of view when organizing listening lessons. But I think to that end, that is all of my tips, and we, I believe, have reached the end of the presentation.
Just the presentation.
Yeah. Yes, of course, but we now have time for Q&A.
We have almost 100 questions.
Wow.
Okay.
Fantastic.
We have promised a time up till 4:30 to our audience, but we will look at something that we can kind of close it, if not at 4, then at least by 4:10, Dan and Neil, because I think the questions are quite good and it's lovely to have you and get the answers through you. Okay, so I am also very keen to have these answers fielded. If your permission is there, we can go to the Q&A in case for the mindset you want to say a few words first.
Yeah, just most of the examples and the ideology that we've come out with for teaching IELTS today, you can find it in these in the Mindset series. It's 4 levels. With the foundation level is just for getting students used to examples of exam techniques and learning for exams in general. So we don't put a band score on that, but it's sort of for A2 level students, and then the others are ones targeting band 5.5, 6.5 and 7.5. We've also got the ebook, and there's a lot of online modules at the start, so they can use the online modules as well. It's flexible in that you can teach which skills you want and which lessons you want. There's first language specific content, unfortunately not for any of the Indian languages, but there's Speaking Plus and Writing Plus, which gives you extra online speaking and writing support. And there's a lot of teacher support in the teacher's book, and also, as we mentioned before, the Mindset Teacher's Guide, which Sujata's already seen. Some sections of this are dedicated to mindset, but there are also information on the exam marking procedure, ideas for developing your own material, and things like this, which can be used with any course book as well, and that's free. Obviously the course book isn't free, but that's all I've got to say about mindset today, but that's where most of our examples came from today. So thank you.
So I think, we have lots that's kind of come from you both, and there's lots that still needs a bit of clarification, because they've been asking, why Instagram to be used, if at all, for live teaching, why not Cambridge University resources? So Dan, a quick answer on that would be nice.
Yes, certainly. I think it's about variety. I think ultimately, and I think by using different resources and pulling them from different places, I think you just keep the variety up. I think, of course, Cambridge and coursebook certainly materials are home to some beautiful, really beautiful images. But I think also just addressing that point about it, so using those, but also adding the personal touch as well. I think that's the key, and that's why Instagram has been chosen, because it does imply that personal touch to your speaking. And again, the reason for personalization, of course, is the students already have that foundation on which to speak. So I think keeping a mixture and having a variety, absolutely. But the reason we have Instagram as one example, just to bring in that personalization.
Thank you so much. I think more the natural the classroom, the better it is for the students to connect, and variety is always a welcome, tool. So no second thoughts on that. Dan, the second question, Neil and Dan, in fact, both, is how important is accent, and how can mother tongue influence can be worked out, or how negative impact it can have on your speaking scores?
Accent doesn't really have a negative impact on the score. As long as the pronunciation is understandable, then you don't really have to worry about accent if we're just talking about accent. If you're mispronouncing words, then obviously that does have a negative impact on the speaking score, but not just the accent at all. That's why I was talking about this going too fast, and I hope I didn't offend anyone when I said it, because that's just an example from being an examiner in the UK for quite a few number of years, that quite often we found that Indian students would lose the understandability of it by going too fast. And that's what I was talking about before. But accent as a whole should not impact on the marking by the examiner.
Right. So clarity
Clarity
and
is the key, yeah.
at the right speed is what is the underlining, training that needs to be focused in.
Yeah, because I just think some students overcompensate. We don't want people speaking very slowly, because it becomes another problem with coherence and cohesion, because we think you can't really put a sentence together, or it's too boring. But if you're talking like this, then it gets really hard for everybody to understand. So just take a breath and go slowly is the one thing I would say for Indian students in particular. But the accent, they don't need to worry about that as long as they're pronouncing the words correctly. No one's going to say, oh, she's got an Indian accent or he's got a German accent. It's fine, really.
Mm. And I think just to bring in here as well, I think comparison's also a really nice one. So I think not on the accent point, I think, this is on the pace point. I think that there's plenty of materials, certainly from Cambridge online and with courses, etc., where you can see demonstration speaking videos, and they are really good models for students to follow and to get an idea of the pace. And again, if they are using that recording feature where they've recorded their own answers, again, just they can in real time just check their recording against a good model in terms of pace, and just to get an idea of, okay, was that too fast, was that too slow, and just to give them more confidence that their pace is good.
All right. I think, more or less the answer is, there for everybody. But just to kind of iterate or reiterate a bit, mother tongue influence, is something which does bother some of the speakers, in South Asia. We have books written on the repetitive mother tongue influence, which interrupts in natural speaking style and delivery. Any tips for classroom? How can they kind of work better, to help those students?
I'm trying to think of any.
You think shadowing technique, which is a very powerful technique to kind of look at a model speaking and kind of trying to kind of repeat, you listen, you repeat with the speaker, and then you mute the speaker and you repeat, yourself, because the script is playing. So do you think shadowing a speaker where you want to model would probably help you get over, a simple thing like sir and sure also, which becomes quite overlapping in the true sense of the word? This has come, Dan, Neil, many a times, And somehow, since it's come in today also, I really wanted to kind of take it forward to you guys.
It's a really lovely question. I think it's something that is, I think I'm just trying to think about how it can be enhanced with technology. I like the idea of shadowing, certainly. I think if you did that, I think, again, going back to the speech to text software that we saw earlier, where students can model their own answers, for example, and of course using the transcript. So if they can find a good model with the transcripts, they can follow exactly what's being said. But also, again, the idea of muting, repeating it onto the Google Doc, and then cross-referencing that with the transcript, for example. I think it's a really nice way. I mean, with speech to text software, for example, I think it's good enough to indicate where major pronunciation issues are going wrong, or major issues are coming in with your spoken English particularly. But I love that idea of then referencing that to a model and to another transcript, for example, repeating that just to keep practicing. That's really nice. Yeah.
Correct. Thank you so much. In the technology element, I think that was very, very essential, and a quick take back. You have it, use it where you need it the most, right? Moving to the next question is more towards the writing now, Neil and Dan. You covered beautifully all aspects, but there are 4 or 5 burning questions.
Mm-hmm.
First question is, you used a word, Neil, ceiling, in your task 1. Could you elaborate? Because there was a student who wanted us to kind of train us, to go to that slide also in between.
Would you like to go back to that slide as well? Yeah, I can bring that slide back up.
That's an important take back. And task
the ceiling means that you can't score any higher than this if you don't do these things. But it's not for the whole way through. They're all in the task achievement that they come over in the all of the writing and speaking ones. You'll see use this word ceiling, and for example, if there's no paragraphing in the writing, in the writing part 2, you can't score above band 5 in coherence and cohesion. But they're all there in the actual band descriptors that are available online at IELTS.org. But ceiling, I just mean you can't score a higher mark than that if you don't do these things. That's all. Is that okay?
If you want to jump your band score, and everybody wants a dream band 8 for their students, so you please kind of make sure all the tips that have been given by Neil specifically in that slide should be incorporated, and students shouldn't be doing those. Those are the don'ts. Don't do this. Don't miss this. So that automatically they become do's in a way, in the positive side.
And although I'm saying this is just for task achievement, it does quite often end up having a negative impact on the other scoring as well. Although these are the ceilings here that you can't go above. Like if you've got no overview, sometimes then it means that the organisation isn't so good as well, so you could lose marks in the coherence and cohesion. If there's no data, again, you can't really understand what's going on. So, and you won't be using some of the vocabulary that you should be using to get those higher band scores. So it does have an impact throughout all the marking, although they only really lose the marks in that little section of the text. So they are extremely important, and if you don't do these, you're not going to score above those scores. And I think it's really important students know this.
So 4 parameters, 25% of each is what gets your sum total for task 1. So please make sure you keep that balance and you know where the threshold is. Now task 1 can't be completed without the question of where the overall should be. And along with answering this, also please answer, one of the trainers has asked for a diagram specific question, how is overall to be designed? Any tips on that?
Honestly speaking, I think that are we talking about the process diagram? We haven't covered that really today, but I think that this is it's the one that students hate the most, but it's actually the easiest one to do, because there's certain words that you need in all of them, that sequence it. Like so next and finally and secondly and firstly. So using these words that the words of sequencing are very important. Also, it quite often uses the passive. So being aware of the passive tense and being aware of sequencing words, the order that different things happen in and how we can describe them makes it actually quite easy, because all of the other words, they're actually in the diagram. So if you've got the sequencing words and you know the passive and the tenses well to do that, then basically it's the same answer every time, and it's less common, which is one of the reasons we didn't do it today. but also I know that a lot of teachers and a lot of students have a bit of a fear about it, but I've always thought that it was the easiest one to do. We haven't really got the time to go into it at great length now, but there is actually a video where I discuss this for Cambridge Assessment on YouTube, if anyone wants to see it. So they look me up on YouTube. There's one there where I go to big detail about how to do this. So.
Sure. Please do share the link. I think,
Okay.
we have the answer for this also, in our IELTS.org, where it says, different kind of categories or questions that can come on task 1. And one question, again, I'm repeating, Neil, is overall supposed to be in the last only, or it can be, somewhere?
No, it can go anywhere. In fact, if I was writing the exam myself, I would probably write it at the start. It's just that when we've been training, we've always said it's most commonly at the end, and it does seem that most people prefer it at the end. Personally, I'd write it at the start, but you have to remember it's not exactly the same as an introduction. It's saying what the whole graph shows as a whole. So for some people, it seems like it's more natural at the end, some at the start, but it doesn't matter where really it goes.
So that's for task 1. Moving with no time loss to task 2 is, how to make the position clear. I know it's difficult to answer, but at least some inputs. One of the trainers asked how to make position clear. It clearly says position should be clear. Where all position should be clear? Is it like every para or the opening or the closing only in the task 2? Position should be clear.
I think that making the position clear usually most commonly would go into the conclusion of it. So if we have a look at the slide that Dan's just put up here, we've got this, do you agree or disagree? Well, you put, I mainly agree because, or I tend to agree because, or I tend to agree or disagree because, or, we've got the advantages of, or benefits. You would say like, I believe that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages because, or we've got the two different views, and then you would say like, but in my opinion, I think this. So you should always give your opinion, and you don't have to worry about what your opinion is. The examiner's not marking you on what your opinion is, but make sure it's clear that you do have a belief either way with it, even if in real life you don't really care. That's what I'm saying.
I agree with Neil completely. The vocabulary related to opinion essay or problem solution essay is the key to kind of be there and make it evident for the examiner to see that you're following the demand of the question, and do not, kind of go around the question, go on the question. That's very, very important and vital for you to score a safe band, which is always above 7. So Neil, the next question here, any penalties, that's from the audience, not from me, any penalty to keep a watch for the task 2?
For task 2, I would say the most important one is the paragraphing, because without clear paragraphing, you can't score above a band 5, and that's the main one there. That's the only real ceiling there. And also 250 words, it's a lot to write in 40 minutes. So just making sure you know how much you can write in 40 minutes is the other one, because I think if you go below 241, is it? You lose a band there as well, and more or less every 10 words down you're losing a band. So length is very important, and that coherence and cohesion that comes from the paragraphs is the most important. So using that right format and making sure you've got an introduction and a conclusion and the two paragraphs in between, which is why I showed you the sort of meat sandwich with the 2 pieces of meat in the middle, to remember that.
So, I must say a picture speaks 1,000 words, it's all there, at times we ask the same question, but it's all there, it's covered, and
well, I've got 3 there, but
yeah, so how you start, how you end, and where are you on the topic, and how non-repetitive are you, and what range you cover. You're covering all the power words which are given in the band descriptor, which is just a click away on the Cambridge IELTS.org website. So we've already mentioned about the band descriptor in the chat box. Do look at the link and use that to train your students more and more effectively. You're doing a wonderful job, but I'm sure after today's session, you have more power and more knowledge to put to use in your classrooms. So before we kind of call it a close for today's session, 2 more questions, and those questions are for the reading, Dan. You mentioned the tool, but people did not get the name of the tool so clearly. Can you again repeat which tool did you say? What,
of course, the speed reading tool, this one.
and yeah, so where can they find it? You know,
Absolutely. So if you type in, simply if you go into Google and type in Spreeder, that will bring up the tool that I've demonstrated today. Again, speed reading as well, speed reading software will also bring up different tools, but the one that we focused on in today's presentation is called Spreeder. And if you type that in, you'll see they do have a kind of a demo version or a free version, which is the one I used, which looks like this, the homepage. So yes, make a note of that, and you'll find it quite quickly on Google.
Perfect. Another question, Dan, which is kind of coming is, we know we did not go in the depth of it. We covered skimming, scanning, but true, false, not given has been quite troublemakers for many. You know, we know about the factors, we know about when to use skimming and scanning, but at times, even as trainers, you know, we have a conflict with the answer key. So where more and what more can they do to kind of get more accuracy, you know, and marks when it comes to true, false, not given for students? Any inputs on that?
Oh, honestly, I don't think that's very fair on Dan at the moment. I think it's a session. It's a session in its own right. We have done sessions on this before. The quick answer is there isn't a quick answer, I'm afraid. So I think, you know, maybe if we can organise another session where we look at true, false, not given, then that's perhaps the best way of doing it. It's the not given that is the most difficult element of this. What I would say is make sure that you're using official practice materials to practice with your students is a really quick question answer for this. You know, so make sure you're using those Cambridge tests or the Cambridge Official Guide to IELTS, or ones that are produced by Cambridge. And I'm not just saying that because I work for Cambridge. It's because all of ours are tested by assessment, who write the test to check that they work properly. And one of the things when I was a teacher, I found that true, false, not given very difficult myself. But after I worked for Cambridge for a while, I realised the problem is that a lot of authors from non-official publishers don't understand the question either, so they're misguiding teachers. But there's not a simple answer to that. We'd have to work through a few practices, I think, together, and maybe that's something we can do later with Sujata at a later date, hopefully. So I'm really sorry that that's not a great answer, but there's no short answer for it. It's just practice and practice, but you do need the guidance to do it, I think, especially if you've seen some that aren't done in the correct way. So
we have another session coming on the 17th and the 19th, and I'll make sure whatever needs more practical exploration, I'll include it in this session, you know, and we'll be focusing on mindset, which is a powerful online tool when it comes to computer-based technology. And Priska had a question, Dan and Neil, that, you know, reading practice material for CBT is very less online, you know, so the real, you know, help to the students is not there. So can Cambridge University Press suggest more websites or more material where actual CBT format reading can be practiced at length by the students?
I mean, at the moment, it's in development, I'm afraid. I think a lot of stuff got pushed back because of the pandemic, although now that means that the test is more popular than ever. I mean, one thing to remember is that the skill of reading the material online is exactly the same skill as reading it off paper. So that it's not that the texts are different in any way. One thing that I also saw a question come about is like, how case sensitive is it? It's not. In the handwritten test, if your handwriting's bad, they actually do say writing block capitals. I would say don't do that on the computer-based test, but in the handwritten test, if your handwriting's bad or you don't like the Latin script, writing in Latin script, then write it in block capital letters because you won't lose marks for it. I don't know how that works in the computer-based test at the moment. I need to find that out. I think you shouldn't be doing it in the computer-based one, but it is case sensitive. But that's the only real difference, really. I mean, the skills that are used in the texts are the same. We do have some apps in development, and if everybody keeps looking at the We Love IELTS website, there should be some things ready in October and sort of towards the end of the year that our colleagues who work on the more digital side, me and Dan work more on the courses side, but work on the more individual practice side, that they're developing at the moment. And I'm sure some are ready next month and some more's going to be ready in December and January, but we don't really have a great amount of material. But just remember, the skills are exactly the same. But also Mindset for IELTS is a lot of practice. There's 60% of the materials online. So you've got the course book, but also, you know, a lot of online content. But it's not a different test at the end of the day. Let's just remember it's not a different test.
You know, so of course, you know, the desire is to have everything, you know, which is ready-made. And mindset is one of the materials which we're going to explore more in our forthcoming sessions, and everything from lesson planning to delivery, it's there, a click away, and we'll be taking you through it, using it more effectively in our forthcoming sessions. But today's session was to kind of look at what we already have and use it to its optimum use. Yeah. And probably, you know, we've been using it for one particular purpose, not for more. So I think that light is spreading in the room, and it's lovely to see how others, you know, as trainers are doing such effective work. And I'm sure together as a team, we can make IELTS reach new heights when it comes to scoring. And I don't want to see 5.8 for India. Yeah.
No, we don't. None of us want to see that.
Yeah, I want more. Yeah. So, and I'm sure, you know, with each of us working towards it, our benchmarking would be better, and India would be reaching 7 soon as an average too, right? So thank you both for a lovely session. Guys, you have, I know the questions are many, but I've tried to pick which were relevant for today's session. And I'm there in the next 2 sessions, so you're free to kind of write more and more to us. Neil is an email away. And of course, Dan is also in the same team. We would love to keep asking questions to them and bringing help to you. But,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's been wonderful learning and hearing and listening to all of you in this Power Pack session. So Neil, Dan, last words before we close the session. Kapil?
Just to say thank you ever so much for presenting. I think to mirror there what Sujata was saying, that we learn best when we learn together, I think. And hopefully the activities we presented today about online learning, you can then use to kind of create your own activities, share them again. The more we share, the more we'll learn.
Yeah, and exactly that from Dan. And sorry we aren't able to go into all the different sort of question types today, but I'm sure we'll be organising more events in the future, and Sujata will be able to help you. And remember, we are an email away, and we're happy to answer any questions regarding the exam as well.
Sounds perfect. Kapil?
Thank you, Sujata, Neil, and Dan. I think it's been a wonderful session, and our participants were waiting for long for such a session. And I'm sure, you know, this would have helped them in sharing a lot of insights from you guys. And they are looking forward for another 2 sessions. So we hope for the best. And it's been really great. It was much needed. That's all I'll say. And thank you, Neil and Sujata once again.
Yeah. So guys, that's the end of the session. And, you know, we wish you a good day ahead and happy teaching, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah. Bye, guys.